Okay, so starting with looking at my game.cs, my demo is about the same, except now I am adding sprite boxes through the use of a sprite manager, and then also creating my sprite batches through my sprite batch manager and attaching the relevant sprites to those. And then I have a remove here just to test that functionality for my add by priority for the sprite batch manager. And so now I'll just go ahead and run my game. So you can see right here that the priorities given are 1 for the aliens, 10 for the birds, 3 for, that one doesn't exist, 2 for Stitch, and then 1 for the sprite boxes. And if I go ahead and rerun the game, you can see right here that it starts with the bird and then switches to the Stitch and then switches back to the bird. And the way that's done is initially Stitch is drawn with a lower priority than the birds, which is 10 to 2. And then in my update, at 3 seconds, I update the bird's priority to have a lesser priority than the Stitch. And then at 6 seconds, I update the Stitch to have a lesser priority than the birds, and also anything else on the scene. So moving on to my actual class diagram. The way that the Sprite Batch Manager works is essentially the Sprite Batch Manager holds, through composition, a list of 0 to many sprite batches, and then each sprite batch holds a sprite node manager, and the sprite node manager can hold, through composition, 0 to many sprite nodes. And then, working the way down some more, the sprite nodes hold a reference to a heterogeneous, base class called base sprite, and that allows a sprite node to be responsible for either a sprite or sprite box, unbeknownst to itself. And so basically the way all this is working together is that the sprite batch manager can call draw, and it'll do that on each of its sprite batches, and then the sprite batch itself will draw each of its sprite nodes by talking to the sprite node manager that it owns. Okay, and then so lastly, to show my priority, the way I'm implementing my priority, and also that there are no news in game. So, right, I've replaced the azul color with to be, just giving 4 more floats for the color, and then the screen rec was already set in my last demo. So the way I implemented the priority, adding by priority, is, and I'm still up in the air about this, but basically I have my manager implement a base priority add method, and in this it has functionality to the same functionality to remove, but instead of adding to the derived list, it instead passes the node the priority and then has the derived manager implement the functionality for the derived priority add. But it is a virtual function, so that way if you haven't defined it, then it's just a regular old add. And this is what I'm torn about. I think it may be reasonable to just enable the base manager for any, basically, my idea is that I could have a base node be a priority base node, essentially, adding this functionality to every base node, and that would enable any manager to add to their list by priority. But it would also force every base node to have a priority, which may not be a desired functionality. But either way, so this is not overridden by default, or it's not abstract forcing overriding, but my sprite batch manager does override it, and it's kind of a doozy. Basically, I iterate through the list and I check the priority, and if and depending on the priority, I either insert before or I insert after, and these are 2 methods that are implemented by my base collection class. And so that's how I'm getting around not using any derived collection D-Link manager classes, and instead I just have this basic insert before and insert after, and that allows for inserting into a sorted order based on the priority.